In a makeshift laboratory that was once a leaking shed, a determined woman stirred tons of pitchblende ore with an iron rod nearly as tall as herself, her hands cracking and burning from mysterious forces she didn't yet understand. Marie Curie was literally touching the building blocks of the universe, one radioactive gram at a time. The year was 1902. And in that freezing Parisian shed where her breath formed clouds in the winter air, she held up a glowing tube that pulsed with an otherworldly blue-green light. She knew she had captured something that would forever change how humanity understood the nature of matter itself. What drives a person to spend years in physical agony, processing 8 tons of toxic ore by hand, all to isolate a substance that weighs less than a grain of rice? Tonight we follow the extraordinary path of Maria Sklodowska, who fled Russian-occupied Poland with nothing but fierce intellect and unshakable resolve. She transformed herself into Marie Curie, the woman whose glowing discoveries would illuminate the atomic age, while slowly consuming her from within. From her childhood in Warsaw, where speaking Polish could mean imprisonment, we'll witness how a young girl's midnight lessons by candlelight sparked a hunger for knowledge that no force could extinguish. We'll stand beside her in those early Parisian winters when she wore every piece of clothing she owned to bed and chose hunger over warmth, all for the privilege of attending lectures that might unlock nature's secrets. We'll feel the ache in her arms as she stirred cauldrons of radioactive ore, unknowingly absorbing doses of radiation that would be considered lethal today. She was driven by the conviction that atoms themselves held keys to understanding our universe, and in her moment of greatest triumph, we'll discover how the ethereal glow of radium represented both humanity's greatest promise and its most sobering warning. A light that could cure cancer or level cities, save lives or end them, depending on how wisely we wielded the knowledge she had unlocked. This is the story of a woman who painted with atoms, whose sacrifice illuminated pathways we still follow today. Her legacy glows eternal in every life saved by radiation therapy, every mystery solved by carbon dating, and every barrier broken by those who dare to discover. As we begin this journey into the atomic age, let yourself settle into the quiet determination of a woman who believed that no mystery was too deep to solve, no sacrifice too great for understanding, and no obstacle too large for patient observation to overcome. Close your eyes and imagine that soft blue-green glow emanating from a test tube in a darkened laboratory. The first light of a new era, born from one woman's refusal to accept that anything in nature was beyond human comprehension. Maria Sklodowska's childhood in Warsaw was a delicate dance between brilliance and survival. In the 1870s, Poland existed only as a ghost nation, carved up between Russia, Prussia, and Austria, like a cake at a conqueror's feast. The Sklodowski family lived under the watchful eyes of Russian authorities who had banned the Polish language from schools, Polish history from textbooks, and Polish dreams from public spaces. Yet within their modest apartment, something extraordinary flourished, a love of learning so fierce it could not be extinguished by any occupying force. Her father, Władysław, was a mathematics and physics teacher, demoted for his Polish patriotism, forced to accept lesser positions and smaller wages. But poverty could not diminish his passion for knowledge. Each evening, he transformed their cramped living quarters into a secret university. While Russian inspectors slept, he would gather his 5 children around the kitchen table, his voice soft but animated as he explained how light bent through prisms, how numbers danced in perfect patterns, how the universe operated according to laws more beautiful than any czar's decree. Young Maria would sit transfixed, her gray eyes wide with wonder, absorbing these lessons like a plant drinking sunlight. Her mother, Bronislawa, had once directed Warsaw's most prestigious boarding school for girls, a woman of such grace and intelligence that even Russian officials treated her with grudging respect. But when Maria was 6, tuberculosis began its cruel invasion. The disease was merciless, transforming this vibrant educator into a shadow who communicated through whispered words and gentle touches. Maria learned to read her mother's condition in the subtle signs, the handkerchief spotted with blood hastily hidden, the conversations that stopped when children entered the room, the way her father's face tightened with worry he tried to conceal. The house became a place of hushed footsteps and closed doors. Maria and her siblings were forbidden from embracing their mother, the risk of contagion too great. Instead, they would stand in her doorway, reciting their lessons, showing their drawings, trying to pour all their love across that terrible distance. Bronislawa would smile and nod, her eyes bright with pride even as her body failed. She managed the household finances with mathematical precision, stretching every ruble, ensuring her children's education continued even as medical bills mounted. When Maria was 8, her eldest sister Zofia contracted typhus from a boarder in their home, one of the paying guests they relied upon for survival. The disease claimed her within weeks, leaving a void that would never fully heal. 2 years later, Bronislawa's long battle ended. Maria stood at her mother's funeral, a 10-year-old girl who had already learned that the universe could be both wondrously ordered and devastatingly cruel. The double loss left scars that would shape her entire life, a fierce independence born from early grief, a determination to honor the dead through achievement. The family's financial situation deteriorated rapidly. Władysław, now a widower with 4 surviving children, took on extra tutoring jobs that kept him away until late at night. The older siblings found work where they could, but money remained desperately tight. It was then that Maria and her sister Bronya conceived their pact, a plan both practical and audacious. They would take turns supporting each other's education in Paris, where women could actually attend university. Bronya would go first, studying medicine while Maria worked to fund her studies. Then, once established, Bronya would support Maria's scientific education. At 17, Maria began her years of sacrifice. She found work as a governess for wealthy families, a position that placed her in a peculiar social limbo. Too educated to befriend the servants, too poor to be accepted by her employers. Her first position took her to a country estate owned by the Żurawski family, prosperous landowners who treated her with the casual indifference reserved for furniture. She taught their younger children French and mathematics while sending nearly every kopeck of her salary to Paris. The irony burned like acid. Here she was, daughter of Polish patriots, teaching the children of families who had grown rich collaborating with Russian authorities. She bit her tongue when they spoke dismissively of Polish culture, when they laughed at the idea of educating the lower classes, when they treated knowledge as a luxury rather than a necessity. At night, in her small room under the eaves, she would pull out hidden textbooks on chemistry and physics, studying by candlelight until her eyes burned. The work itself was intellectually stultifying, teaching basic arithmetic to children who had no interest in learning, French conjugations to students who would never need them beyond social pretense. But Maria found ways to keep her mind alive. She convinced the eldest Żurawski son to let her use a small shed for chemistry experiments, mixing compounds and observing reactions with equipment cobbled together from kitchen supplies. She devoured scientific journals in French and German, languages she had taught herself through sheer determination. Then came an unexpected complication. Kazimierz Żurawski, the family's eldest son, home from university for the holidays, became fascinated by their governess. He was handsome, intelligent, and surprisingly progressive in his views. Their conversations ranged from mathematics to philosophy, and Maria found herself falling in love despite every rational argument against it. For a brief, shining moment, she allowed herself to imagine a different future. Marriage to a man who valued her mind, a position in society that would allow her to pursue science openly. The dream shattered when Kazimierz announced his intentions to his parents. Their reaction was swift and brutal. Marry a governess, a penniless nobody? They threatened to disinherit him, to destroy his career before it began. Faced with the choice between love and his comfortable future, Kazimierz chose comfort. He returned to university without a word of goodbye, leaving Maria to serve out her contract in a house where everyone now knew of her humiliation. The rejection cut deep, but it also crystallized something within her. Love, she realized, was as unstable as the chemical reactions she studied, capable of transformation without warning, subject to pressures she couldn't control. Science, on the other hand, offered truths that didn't depend on social standing or family approval. An element's properties remained constant, whether studied by a princess or a pauper. Letters from Bronya became her lifeline during these dark months. Her sister wrote of the Sorbonne's grand amphitheaters, of professors who cared only for the quality of one's mind, of laboratories where students could touch actual scientific instruments instead of merely reading about them. Each letter was a promise that another world existed, one where Maria's dreams were not impossible fantasies, but achievable goals. The years of governessing stretched on. 3, 4, 5 years of sending money to Paris while her own dreams gathered dust. She moved between positions, each family much like the last, teaching spoiled children while her own education stagnated. But she never stopped studying, never stopped believing that her turn would come. She mastered calculus from textbooks, memorized chemical formulas, and solved physics problems in her head while supervising children's piano practice. Finally, in 1891, when Maria was 24, Bronya wrote the letter she had been waiting for. Her sister had completed her medical degree and married a fellow Polish exile, a doctor named Kazimierz Dluski. They had established a practice in Paris and could offer Maria a home. The moment had arrived to claim her portion of their pact. Maria's departure preparations were methodical and minimal. She had saved just enough for train fare and perhaps 1 year of extremely frugal living. Her possessions fit into a single trunk: a few dresses, her precious textbooks, a folding chair for the train journey, and a thick blanket for the winter she knew awaited her. Friends and family gathered at the Warsaw station to see her off, some warning her about the dangers of Paris, others envying her courage. As the train pulled away from the platform, Maria pressed her face to the window, watching Poland disappear into the distance. She was leaving everything familiar: her language, her family, even her name, which she would soon change to the French Marie to better fit into her new world. The journey took 3 days, traveling 4th class, sleeping upright on her folding chair, rationing the food she had packed to save money. Paris revealed itself through a gray dawn mist as the train approached the city. Marie's first glimpse of the Sorbonne district left her breathless. Here were buildings dedicated entirely to learning, students hurrying between lectures with armloads of books, shop windows displaying scientific instruments like precious jewels. This was a city where knowledge was currency, where a woman with sufficient determination might transform herself into something extraordinary. Bronya and Casimir welcomed her warmly to their apartment, but Marie quickly realized that living with newlyweds, however kind, would not suit her purposes. Their social life, necessary for building Casimir's medical practice, interfered with the absolute focus she required. Within weeks, she found a 6th-floor garret in the Latin Quarter, a room so small she could touch both walls by stretching out her arms, with a sloping ceiling that leaked in the rain and windows that rattled in the wind. The room was bitterly cold in winter. Ice formed on the inside of the windows, and Marie would wake to find her water pitcher frozen solid. She owned 1 dress for lectures, 1 for laboratory work, and would wear every piece of clothing she owned to bed, piling textbooks on top of her blanket for extra weight and warmth. Her diet consisted mainly of bread, chocolate, and occasionally some eggs or fruit when she could afford them. She budgeted every centime with scientific precision, choosing between food and heating fuel, always choosing neither in favor of laboratory fees. The Sorbonne's lecture halls were another kind of cold, the chill of being the only woman in a room of hundreds, of professors who looked through her as if she were transparent, of fellow students who whispered and stared. Her French, despite years of study, was heavily accented, marking her as doubly foreign. But Marie had not traveled 1,000 miles to be discouraged by whispers. She sat in the front row of every lecture, her pen flying across the page, capturing every word, every equation, every precious piece of knowledge. The workload was staggering. Having taught herself from outdated textbooks, she discovered gaps in her education that needed immediate remedy. While other students attended 1 or 2 lectures daily, Marie attended 5 or 6, racing between physics, mathematics, and chemistry courses. At night, she would climb the 6 flights to her garret and study by candlelight until dawn, surviving on 3 or 4 hours of sleep. Her professors began to notice the quiet Polish woman who never missed a lecture, whose homework was always impeccable despite being written in imperfect French. When examination results were posted, Marie Sklodowska's name appeared at the top of the physics degree list, above hundreds of male students who had enjoyed every advantage she had been denied. The following year, she placed second in mathematics. The university's laboratories became her true home. She would arrive before the assistants and leave after the janitors, conducting experiments with a methodical intensity that impressed even skeptical professors. Here, finally, was the world she had dreamed of during those long nights as a governess. A world where results mattered more than origins, where careful observation could unlock nature's secrets. It was in this state, exhausted, exhilarated, completely absorbed in her work, that Marie attended a gathering of Polish expatriate students in early 1894. She had been seeking laboratory space for magnetism experiments, and a friend mentioned that Pierre Curie, a brilliant physicist already known for his work on crystallography, might have equipment to share. Their first meeting was like observing a chemical reaction in real time. Pierre, 8 years her senior, was a dreamy, intense man who spoke about science with the passion of a poet. He had already made significant discoveries about the symmetry of crystals and the relationship between magnetism and temperature. But more than his achievements, what struck Marie was how he listened to her ideas, not with the patronizing patience she had grown accustomed to, but with genuine intellectual engagement. They began meeting to discuss her magnetism research, conversations that would stretch for hours as they walked along the Seine, oblivious to everything but the flow of ideas between them. Pierre introduced her to new instruments, new techniques, new ways of thinking about the invisible forces that shaped matter. Marie challenged his theories, suggested new experiments, pushed him to see familiar problems from fresh angles. Their correspondence during a brief separation that summer revealed the depth of their connection. Letters flew between Paris and the countryside, filled with equations and diagrams that were more intimate than any love poetry. "I am working on crystallization patterns," Pierre would write, "but I find myself thinking of how you would approach the problem." Marie would respond with pages of calculations, ending with, "I await our next conversation with an impatience that interferes with my concentration." When Pierre proposed marriage, it was characteristic of them both, logical, practical, and quietly revolutionary. "We could accomplish so much more together," he said, "our minds united in pursuit of truth." He offered her not just love, but partnership, not just marriage, but a shared laboratory, a shared life dedicated to unraveling the universe's mysteries. Their wedding in July 1895 was a simple affair. Marie wore a dark blue dress she could later use for laboratory work, and their honeymoon was spent bicycling through the French countryside, stopping to collect mineral samples and discuss scientific papers. They established themselves in a small apartment that was part home, part laboratory, their love deepening with each shared discovery. As the century drew to a close, Marie had transformed herself from a Polish governess into a French scientist, from Maria Sklodowska into Marie Curie. But this was only the beginning. Henri Becquerel's recent discovery that uranium salts could fog photographic plates through solid barriers had caught her attention. Here was a phenomenon that defied explanation, a mystery waiting to be solved. Standing at the threshold of a new investigation, Marie could not know that she was about to step into the atomic age itself, that her careful measurements would reveal forces powerful enough to transform medicine, warfare, and humanity's understanding of matter itself. She knew only that here was a question worth pursuing, and she had finally found both the tools and the partner to pursue it with. The real work was about to begin. When Marie chose to investigate Henri Becquerel's strange observation that uranium salts could fog photographic plates through solid barriers, she was unknowingly stepping into the realm of forces that could reshape civilization itself. The year was 1897. and she needed a thesis topic for her doctorate, something original, unexplored, worthy of years of dedication. Becquerel's accidental discovery had puzzled the scientific community for months. He had left uranium salts on photographic plates wrapped in thick black paper, returning to find the plates fogged as if exposed to light. But what force could penetrate solid barriers? What invisible energy was at work? Marie sensed that this mystery held profound secrets, though she could not imagine that her investigation would unlock the power hidden within atoms themselves. Using an electrometer invented by Pierre and his brother Jacques, Marie began measuring the mysterious rays with unprecedented precision, her methodical approach revealing patterns that previous researchers had missed entirely. The device, exquisitely sensitive to electrical charges, could detect the faintest ionization of air caused by uranium's emanations. Where others had relied on photographic plates, crude and unreliable, Marie brought quantitative rigor to a qualitative phenomenon. She spent weeks calibrating the instrument, learning its quirks and sensitivities, developing techniques to eliminate interference from temperature, humidity, and vibration. Her laboratory notebooks from this period reveal a mind of extraordinary discipline, recording not just results but atmospheric pressure, weather conditions, time of day, any variable that might affect her measurements. She discovered that uranium's activity remained constant regardless of its chemical form, whether oxide or pure metal, suggesting that this property belonged to the element itself, not to molecular arrangements. The shed that became their laboratory was a monument to scientific determination, a leaking, freezing former dissection room that the university refused to improve, where Marie would conduct world-changing research in conditions that would challenge a medieval peasant. The roof leaked so badly that during rainstorms they would cover their equipment with oilcloths and continue working around the puddles. In winter, the temperature inside barely rose above freezing. Marie's breath would fog as she bent over her instruments, and she learned to work with numb fingers, pausing occasionally to warm her hands over a small coal stove that provided more smoke than heat. The walls grew black with soot and chemical stains. Mice scurried through gaps in the floorboards, yet in this squalid space, Marie felt a profound contentment. Here she was, free to pursue truth without interference, to follow her measurements wherever they led. She and Pierre would often work late into the night, so absorbed in their experiments that they forgot to eat, finding warmth in shared discovery rather than physical comfort. Hour after hour, Marie stirred massive vats of pitchblende ore with iron rods, her arms aching and her hands developing strange burns, unaware that she was absorbing radiation levels that would be considered lethal by today's standards. The pitchblende, a black tar-like uranium ore from Austrian mines, arrived in sacks that she and Pierre hauled into their shed like coal miners. To extract the radioactive elements, she developed a process of chemical separation that required physical strength as much as intellectual brilliance. She would dissolve the ore in acid, precipitate out different compounds, filter, crystallize, and repeat, each cycle concentrating the radioactive material. The work was backbreaking. She stood for hours over boiling vats, stirring with rods as tall as she was, the caustic fumes burning her throat and eyes. Her hands became stained yellow-brown from the chemicals, the skin cracking and peeling. Strange sores appeared that wouldn't heal. At night, she would collapse into bed, her muscles screaming, only to rise before dawn and begin again. The birth of daughter Irene brought new complexity to their scientific partnership. Marie would nurse her baby between experiments, often with radioactive residue still clinging to her clothes and skin. She refused to abandon her research for motherhood, instead integrating the two with characteristic determination. A cradle appeared in the laboratory corner, and Irene's first lullabies were the bubbling of acid baths and the scratch of pen on paper as Marie recorded measurements. She would break from stirring pitchblende to feed her daughter, then return to her cauldrons, radioactive dust settling on everything, including the baby's blankets. Pierre's mother moved in to help with childcare, but Marie insisted on maintaining her laboratory schedule. She developed a routine of extraordinary efficiency, experiments planned to allow for nursing breaks, calculations done while rocking the cradle with her foot. Later, she would bring Irene to the laboratory as a toddler, teaching her to count using test tubes, never imagining that this child, marinated in radiation from birth, would one day win her own Nobel Prize for atomic research. Pierre's growing health problems, mysterious pains in his legs and back that doctors couldn't explain, were actually early symptoms of radiation poisoning, though the concept wouldn't be understood for decades. He had always been delicate, prone to what he called his attacks of weakness. But the symptoms intensified dramatically after they began working with concentrated radioactive materials. His hands developed the same stubborn sores as Marie's. He experienced crushing fatigue that no amount of rest could cure. Sharp pains would shoot through his legs without warning, causing him to stumble. His bones ached as if bruised from within. The doctors he consulted were baffled, prescribing rest cures and dietary changes that provided no relief. Pierre began carrying a cane, joking darkly that he was aging in dog years. Neither he nor Marie connected these symptoms to their work. How could they, when the very concept of radiation damage to living tissue had yet to be discovered? They noticed that radium samples could burn skin if held too long, but dismissed this as a chemical effect, like acid burns, rather than evidence of a more sinister interaction between radioactivity and human cells. Their laboratory notebooks began to glow with an eerie green light as radioactive contamination built up on every surface, a beautiful and deadly testament to their groundbreaking research. At first, they were enchanted by this luminescence. Marie would sometimes bring visitors to the laboratory at night, turning off the gas lamps to reveal shelves of glowing tubes and bottles like captured fireflies. The very air seemed to shimmer with phosphorescence. Their notebooks, where they recorded years of measurements, absorbed so much radiation that they would remain dangerously radioactive for centuries to come. Marie's handwriting, neat and precise, traced formulas and observations that glowed faintly in the dark, each page a palimpsest of scientific discovery and slow poisoning. They kept vials of radium salts in their pockets, enjoying the warmth they generated, showing friends how the material could make a screen fluoresce from across a room. This casual intimacy with radioactive materials, handling them with bare hands, breathing their emanations, allowing them to saturate their workspace, would exact a terrible price, though the bill would not come due for years. Isolating radium required processing literally tons of pitchblende ore, a Herculean task that Marie approached with the systematic determination of someone who understood that great discoveries demanded great sacrifice. The mathematics were staggering. Each ton of pitchblende contained perhaps 1/10 of a gram of radium, meaning that to obtain even a barely visible quantity required processing amounts of ore that would fill railway cars. Marie developed a methodical approach, treating the work like a military campaign. She negotiated with the Austrian government for access to mine tailings, arranged transportation, and managed the logistics of storing and processing massive quantities of raw material. Day after day, year after year, she refined her chemical techniques, finding ways to concentrate the radioactive fraction at each step. She kept detailed accounts of every batch, every precipitation, every crystallization, building a vast database of chemical behavior that would guide future researchers. The physical toll was enormous. By the end, she had personally processed 8 tons of pitchblende, stirring and pouring and filtering until her body moved through the motions automatically, mechanically, while her mind remained fixed on the atomic secrets slowly revealing themselves. The scientific establishment initially dismissed their claims about radioactivity, forcing Marie to prove her theories through sheer volume of evidence, conducting thousands of measurements with obsessive precision. When she first announced that she had discovered not one but 2 new radioactive elements, polonium and radium, many prominent scientists scoffed. Where was the pure sample? What was the atomic weight? How could she claim to have discovered elements that she couldn't isolate and display? The criticism stung, but it also motivated her to push harder. She understood that extraordinary claims required extraordinary evidence. So she measured and measured again, building an unassailable fortress of data. She documented every step of her chemical separations, every fraction's radioactivity, every crystallization attempt. Her laboratory notebooks swelled with tables of numbers, graphs of decay rates, diagrams of apparatus. When skeptics challenged her methods, she invited them to witness her experiments, standing quietly by as they verified her results with their own hands. Slowly, grudgingly, the scientific community began to accept that this Polish woman working in a freezing shed had indeed discovered new fundamental elements. Working in conditions that would horrify modern safety inspectors, Marie developed techniques for handling radioactive materials that were revolutionary for their time, though tragically inadequate for protecting her health. She pioneered the use of sealed tubes for storing concentrated samples, recognizing that radioactive materials could contaminate everything they touched. She developed protocols for cleaning equipment between experiments, though her methods, washing with acid, wiping with cloth, merely spread contamination rather than eliminating it. She noticed that prolonged handling of radium caused painful burns and instituted rules about limiting direct contact, though these came far too late to prevent serious exposure. Her laboratory practices, meticulously documented, would become the foundation for radiation safety protocols, though future scientists would regard her casual approach with horror. She recorded, for instance, tasting radium salts to verify their purity, describing the flavor as metallic and unpleasant. She noted that radium's glow made it useful as a nightlight, keeping samples by her bedside. These observations, scientifically valuable, read today like a chronicle of slow suicide. The mystery of where radioactive energy came from challenged the fundamental law of conservation of energy, suggesting that atoms themselves might contain vast stores of power waiting to be unlocked. This was the question that kept Marie awake at night, that drove her to ever more precise measurements. Radium emitted energy continuously, heat, light, penetrating rays, without any apparent diminishment of the source. A sample that glowed today would glow just as brightly tomorrow, next year, seemingly forever. This violated everything physicists thought they knew about energy, which could be transformed but never created or destroyed. Where did this endless stream of energy originate? Marie's careful measurements of radium's heat production showed that it released enough energy to melt its own weight in ice every hour after hour, year after year. She hypothesized that atoms themselves must be storehouses of enormous energy, that radioactivity represented the slow release of forces locked within matter since the universe's creation. This insight, published in careful scientific language, contained the seed of both nuclear power and nuclear weapons, though Marie focused only on understanding the phenomenon, not exploiting it. International recognition began arriving through scientific journals and conferences, but Marie faced constant discrimination from male colleagues who credited Pierre with discoveries that were primarily hers. Letters addressed to Marie Curie inquired about your fascinating work on radioactivity, assuming that Marie served merely as her husband's assistant. Conference organizers invited Pierre to speak while suggesting that Marie might accompany him. Even well-meaning colleagues referred to Pierre Curie's laboratory and his discoveries, erasing Marie's central role. She endured these slights with quiet dignity, focusing on her work rather than fighting for recognition. Pierre, to his credit, consistently corrected these misapprehensions, insisting that the radioactivity research was Marie's initiative and that her contributions equaled or exceeded his own. But the prejudice ran deep. When they published joint papers, readers assumed Pierre had done the theoretical work while Marie merely performed routine measurements. The reality that Marie's theoretical insights drove their research while Pierre contributed crucial experimental techniques was too radical for most to accept. The Nobel Prize in Physics arrived in 1903, but the committee initially planned to honor only Pierre and Becquerel until Pierre insisted that Marie's contributions were essential and groundbreaking. The behind-the-scenes maneuvering revealed the depth of institutional sexism. Committee members argued that including a woman would diminish the prize's prestige, that Marie's role had surely been supportive rather than creative. Pierre's response was unequivocal. He would refuse the prize unless Marie shared it. His letter to the committee detailed her pioneering role, her theoretical insights, her years of solitary labor isolating radium. Faced with the prospect of a public scandal, the committee relented, making Marie the first woman to win a Nobel Prize. Even then, the official citation minimized her contributions, praising her for assistance in her husband's work. The prize money, 70,000 francs, allowed them to hire their first laboratory assistant and eat better meals, though Marie continued working with the same punishing intensity. Becoming the first woman to win a Nobel Prize thrust Marie into an uncomfortable spotlight. She preferred the quiet intensity of laboratory work to the public attention that now followed her everywhere. Journalists descended on their laboratory, seeking human interest stories about the woman who had conquered masculine science. They wanted to know about her cooking, her clothes, her duties as wife and mother. Did she sew Pierre's shirts? How did she balance equations while planning dinner menus? The questions infuriated her, but she answered with patient courtesy, understanding that her visibility might inspire other women to pursue science. She began receiving letters from girls around the world asking for advice about studying physics and chemistry. Photography sessions interrupted her experiments. Requests for lectures and appearances multiplied. She developed standard responses, polite but firm, protecting her research time while acknowledging her new role as a symbol. The fame felt like wearing an ill-fitting coat, necessary for warmth but constantly constraining movement. The prize money allowed them to hire an assistant and improve their laboratory conditions, but Marie continued working with the same relentless intensity that had brought them to scientific prominence. If anything, recognition increased her determination to justify the honor through even greater discoveries. She arrived at the laboratory earlier, stayed later, pushed herself harder. The new assistant freed her from some routine tasks, but she filled that time with more ambitious experiments. She began investigating the medical applications of radium, collaborating with physicians who reported remarkable effects on cancerous tumors. She refined her techniques for measuring radioactivity, achieving precision that astounded even sympathetic colleagues. Pierre worried about her health. She was thin, pale, driven by an internal fire that consumed physical reserves she couldn't spare. But Marie brushed aside concerns. There was so much to discover, so many questions to answer. Rest could wait until the work was complete, though of course the work would never be complete. Pierre's tragic death in 1906, crushed by a horse-drawn wagon on a rainy Paris street, shattered Marie's world and left her to continue their research alone while raising two young daughters. He had been walking to a meeting, lost in thought as always, when he stepped behind a military supply wagon. The wheel crushed his skull instantly. Marie received the news at home and collapsed, her grief so profound that friends feared for her sanity. For weeks, she could barely speak, moving through days like a ghost. The laboratory where they had shared so many discoveries became a torture chamber of memories. She would catch herself turning to share an observation with Pierre, only to remember. Their daughters, 8-year-old Irene and baby Eve, needed their mother, but Marie struggled to connect with them through her paralyzing sorrow. She found herself talking to Pierre's empty chair, updating him on experimental results, asking his opinion on theoretical questions. Slowly, work became her salvation. Returning to the laboratory, she discovered that maintaining Pierre's research was a way of keeping him alive. Each measurement honored his memory. Each discovery vindicated their partnership. The University of Paris offered Marie Pierre's professorship, making her the first female professor in the institution's 650-year history, though she accepted more from necessity than ambition. The position provided financial security for her daughters and continued access to laboratory facilities. Her first lecture drew an enormous crowd, curious socialites, journalists, fellow scientists, all eager to witness history. Marie entered the packed amphitheater, pale and composed, and began exactly where Pierre's last lecture had ended, as if no time had passed, as if death were merely a brief interruption in their ongoing conversation about the nature of matter. Her voice remained steady through the technical discussion of radioactive decay, though observers noted her hands trembling as she wrote equations on the board. The lecture was a triumph of will over grief, establishing that she would continue their work not as Pierre's widow, but as a scientist in her own right. Students who expected concessions to her sex or situation found instead a professor of exacting standards, who demanded the same rigor she applied to her own research. Returning to the laboratory after Pierre's death, Marie found solace in the familiar rhythm of research, using work as both memorial to her husband and escape from overwhelming grief. The routine of measurement and calculation provided structure to days that otherwise threatened to dissolve into formless sorrow. She established new research programs, investigating the properties of radioactive elements with even greater intensity. Her laboratory notebooks from this period show a woman channeling emotional pain into scientific precision, measurements recorded with obsessive accuracy, experiments repeated far beyond statistical necessity, theoretical insights pursued with relentless logic. She discovered that different radioactive elements produced different types of radiation, work that would eventually lead to understanding alpha, beta, and gamma rays. She collaborated with André de Bierne to finally isolate pure metallic radium, achieving what skeptics had demanded years earlier. Each success felt hollow without Pierre to share it, yet she persisted, driven by the conviction. The glowing tube trembled in Marie's hands, its ethereal blue-green light pulsing like a captured star in the darkness of her laboratory. 4 years of backbreaking labor had led to this moment. 8 tons of pitchblende ore processed by her own hands, stirred and filtered and crystallized through countless cycles, all to produce this single tenth of a gram of pure radium chloride. The substance weighed less than a grain of rice, yet its significance was immeasurable. As she held the tube up to the window, watching how the glow intensified in complete darkness, Marie understood she was witnessing something that challenged everything scientists believed about the fundamental nature of matter. The luminescence wasn't merely beautiful, it was revolutionary. Each pulse of light represented atoms spontaneously releasing energy, a phenomenon that should have been impossible according to the laws of physics as they were understood. Atoms were supposed to be indivisible, unchanging, the solid foundation upon which all matter was built. Yet here was proof that atoms contained vast internal structures, complex architectures capable of storing and releasing amounts of energy that defied comprehension. The glow emanating from her carefully isolated sample wasn't just light. It was evidence that the universe operated according to principles far stranger and more wonderful than anyone had imagined. Her meticulous measurements over the following weeks confirmed what that first glimpse had suggested. Using her electrometers with unprecedented precision, Marie determined radium's atomic weight to be exactly 225.93, a number she verified through dozens of independent measurements. This wasn't merely adding another element to the periodic table, it was proving the existence of an entirely new category of matter. Elements that could transform themselves, that violated the ancient principle that matter could neither be created nor destroyed. She had discovered not just radium, but radioactivity itself as a fundamental property of certain atoms. The implications struck her with the force of revelation. For centuries, alchemists had dreamed of transmuting base metals into gold, only to be dismissed by modern science as fantasists chasing impossibilities. Yet here in her laboratory, Marie was documenting exactly such transmutations. Radium slowly transformed into other elements, radon gas, then polonium, then lead, in a cascade of atomic metamorphosis that would have seemed like magic to earlier generations. The medieval quest hadn't been foolish after all. It had simply lacked the tools to observe what was happening at scales too small for human perception. Working through the nights with feverish intensity, Marie began mapping these transformations with mathematical precision. She noticed that radium's intensity decreased over time in a peculiar pattern, not randomly, but according to a precise mathematical law. After 1,600 years, exactly half of any radium sample would have transformed into other elements. This concept of half-life emerged from her careful plotting of decay curves, thousands of measurements taken over months and years. She was discovering that radioactive decay followed rules as rigid as planetary orbits, that chaos at the atomic level resolved into elegant mathematical certainties when viewed in aggregate. The medical implications became apparent through a series of accidental discoveries that would reshape human healthcare. Marie noticed that tubes containing concentrated radium samples could burn skin if held too long, leaving marks that resembled severe sunburns. Rather than seeing this as merely dangerous, she recognized the therapeutic potential. If radium could destroy healthy tissue, might it not also destroy diseased tissue? She began collaborating with physicians at Paris hospitals, providing carefully measured radium samples for experimental treatments. The results were remarkable. Tumors shrank, cancerous growths disappeared, patients given death sentences recovered. She had discovered radiation therapy, though neither she nor the doctors understood why it worked. Her laboratory became a beacon for researchers worldwide as she systematically classified radioactive elements according to their properties. She developed standardized techniques for measuring radioactivity, creating a vocabulary and methodology that transformed a collection of strange observations into a rigorous science. Alpha rays, beta rays, gamma rays, she distinguished between different types of radiation based on their ability to penetrate various materials. Some could be stopped by paper, others required lead shields, and some seemed to pass through everything. Each type, she realized, represented different atomic processes, different ways that unstable atoms could release their stored energy. The discovery that radioactivity was an atomic property rather than a molecular one revolutionized chemistry at its foundation. Traditional chemistry dealt with how atoms combined into molecules, but radioactivity revealed that atoms themselves had rich internal structures. An atom of radium behaved identically whether it was pure metal, chloride salt, or any other compound. This atomic independence suggested that the periodic table organized elements not just by their chemical properties, but by fundamental differences in atomic architecture. Marie's work provided the experimental foundation for understanding why elements behaved as they did, not just cataloging their behaviors. Scientists across Europe began replicating her experiments, and with each confirmation came growing recognition that she had discovered a fundamental force of nature. Radioactivity took its place alongside gravity and electromagnetism as a basic phenomenon shaping the universe. Letters poured in from researchers reporting new radioactive elements, new types of radiation, new confirmations of her theories. Ernest Rutherford in England used her techniques to discover that radioactive decay could transform one element into another. The Curie's laboratory methods became the gold standard, their protocols copied in universities from Berlin to Boston. Marie remained skeptical of purely theoretical physics, preferring the solid ground of experimental evidence. Yet her discoveries provided crucial support for Einstein's revolutionary ideas about matter and energy. When Einstein proposed that E equals mc squared in 1905, it was Marie's radium that offered the most dramatic proof. Here was matter converting directly into energy, tiny amounts of mass producing enormous amounts of heat and light. Though she found Einstein's abstractions difficult to accept, she was fundamentally an experimentalist who trusted only what she could measure. Her work validated his most radical propositions about the nature of reality. The international scientific community's acknowledgement came through prizes, honors, and most importantly, through adoption of her methods and insights. The Nobel Committee awarded her an unprecedented second Nobel Prize in 1911, this time in chemistry, making her the only person to win Nobel Prizes in two different sciences. But more meaningful to Marie was seeing her techniques spread through laboratories worldwide. Young scientists arrived in Paris to study her methods, carrying back not just knowledge, but a philosophy of meticulous measurement and careful documentation that would define nuclear research for generations. Standing in her laboratory late one evening, surrounded by glowing samples that painted the walls with ghostly light, Marie could not have imagined the full implications of her discoveries. These luminous tubes represented humanity's first glimpse into the atomic age, an era that would bring both miracles and horrors beyond her gentle imagination. Nuclear power plants would light entire cities, atomic bombs would level them, medical isotopes would save millions of lives, radiation would claim others. She had opened a door that could never be closed, releasing forces that would reshape civilization in ways both wonderful and terrible. But in that moment, there was only the quiet glow of radium in the darkness, and the satisfaction of questions answered through patient observation. The atomic age had begun in a drafty shed in Paris, born from one woman's refusal to accept that anything in nature was too small or too strange to understand. The radioactive contamination that pervaded Marie's laboratory would today trigger immediate evacuation protocols. Yet this very danger provided humanity's first glimpse into radiation's double-edged nature. Her laboratory notebooks, which still require protective equipment to handle safely, more than a century later, bear witness to exposure levels that would horrify modern safety officers. Pages glow faintly in darkness, their radioactive signature as clear as her handwritten formulas. Marie's own body absorbed radiation doses thousands of times higher than current safety limits, her bones becoming repositories of radium that would continue emitting particles long after her death. Yet from this sacrifice emerged the entire field of radiation safety. Her meticulous documentation of radiation burns, the strange warmth of radium samples, the way prolonged exposure caused fatigue and mysterious pains. These observations became the foundation for protecting future generations of nuclear workers. The Radium Institute she established in Paris transformed from a modest research facility into the global epicenter of nuclear physics, nurturing the minds that would unlock the atom's deepest secrets. Young scientists arrived from every continent, drawn by the Institute's reputation for rigorous experimental work and access to precious radioactive materials. Marie personally trained many of them, passing on not just techniques, but a philosophy of patient observation and careful measurement. Her students would go on to discover nuclear fission, develop the first nuclear reactors, and probe the fundamental structure of matter. The Institute's influence rippled outward through generations. Students became teachers who trained more students, each carrying forward Marie's methodical approach to understanding radioactivity. When her daughter Irene won the Nobel Prize in 1935 for discovering artificial radioactivity, the moment represented more than personal triumph. It proved that scientific excellence could transcend gender barriers across generations. Irene had grown up in laboratories, counting with test tubes, learning chemistry at her mother's knee. She absorbed not just knowledge, but an attitude toward discovery, a willingness to pursue difficult questions with relentless determination. Working with her husband, Frédéric Joliot-Curie, Irene bombarded aluminum with alpha particles and observed it becoming radioactive, proving that humans could create radioactive elements, not just discover natural ones. This breakthrough opened the door to medical isotopes, allowing doctors to create specific radioactive materials tailored for treating different diseases. The mother-daughter Nobel legacy remains unique in science, testament to how Marie's influence extended beyond her own discoveries. The medical revolution sparked by Marie's work transformed cancer from an automatic death sentence into a treatable condition for millions. Radium therapy, despite its crude beginnings, established the principle that radiation could selectively destroy diseased tissue while sparing healthy cells. Doctors learned to focus beams, calculate doses, and target tumors with increasing precision. From those early experiments with radium tubes pressed against tumors, emerged modern radiation oncology, linear accelerators delivering precisely calibrated doses, radioactive seeds implanted directly into cancerous tissue, entire treatment protocols built on Marie's foundational discovery that radiation affects living cells. Today's cancer survivors owe their lives to insights born in that freezing Paris shed. The concept of half-life that emerged from Marie's patient measurements became one of science's most powerful tools for understanding time itself. By discovering that radioactive decay followed precise mathematical laws, she gave humanity a clock that could measure millions of years. Carbon dating revolutionized archaeology, allowing scientists to determine when ancient peoples lived, when civilizations rose and fell, when climate changes occurred. Geologists used radioactive decay to calculate Earth's age, finally answering questions that had puzzled humanity since consciousness began. Even cosmologists employed these principles to date meteorites and understand our solar system's formation. Marie's careful plotting of decay curves in her laboratory notebooks provided the key to unlocking deep time. Her experimental evidence helped validate the strange new world of quantum mechanics, though she remained skeptical of theories that strayed too far from measurable phenomena. When physicists proposed that radioactive decay was fundamentally random, that no force triggered it, that God really did play dice with the universe, Marie's data supported their radical claims. Her measurements showed that while individual atomic decays were unpredictable, large numbers followed statistical laws with clockwork precision. This paradox of randomness creating order became central to quantum theory. Though Marie preferred concrete experiments to abstract mathematics, her work provided the empirical foundation that theoretical physicists needed to revolutionize our understanding of reality. The element radium captured public imagination like no scientific discovery before or since, inspiring an atomic age aesthetic that permeated art, architecture, and popular culture. Radium's glow became a symbol of progress, of humanity's power to harness nature's hidden forces. Artists incorporated radioactive themes into paintings and sculptures. Architects designed buildings celebrating atomic structures. Writers imagined futures powered by radioactive energy. The word radium appeared in product names from toothpaste to drinking water, though thankfully most contained no actual radioactive material. This cultural phenomenon reflected genuine excitement about science's potential to transform daily life, an optimism that Marie's discoveries had sparked. Consumer products containing actual radium created a public health crisis that ultimately led to strict regulations on radioactive materials. Radium-painted watch dials glowed appealingly in the dark, but the young women who painted them, licking their brushes to create fine points, developed horrific jaw cancers. Radium water tonics promised vitality but delivered radiation poisoning. These tragedies, emerging years after Marie's death, forced society to confront radiation's dangers and establish protective standards. The regulations that now govern every aspect of nuclear material handling trace directly back to lessons learned from radium's misuse. Marie's success cracked open doors for women in science, though progress remained glacial for decades after her death. Universities that had refused to admit women gradually relaxed their policies, often citing Marie as proof that feminine minds could grasp complex science. Young women wrote to her constantly, seeking advice, encouragement, or simply expressing gratitude for proving what was possible. She answered when she could, always emphasizing that success required not just intelligence but determination to overcome obstacles that male colleagues never faced. The path she blazed was narrow and steep, but it was a path nonetheless. Nuclear power plants generating electricity for millions, medical imaging revealing hidden tumors, smoke detectors protecting homes, space probes powered by radioactive decay, all trace their lineage to Marie's discovery of radioactivity. She could never have imagined the scale of transformation her work would enable. From nuclear submarines exploring ocean depths to positron emission tomography scanning living brains, radioactivity became woven into civilization's fabric. Even the atomic bombs that ended World War II, for all their horror, emerged from principles she uncovered. Marie sought only understanding, but her discoveries reshaped the possible. Standing before her simple grave at the Pantheon, where she rests beside Pierre as the first woman honored in her own right in this monument to French heroes, visitors often leave flowers or scientific instruments as tribute. School children on field trips learn how she transformed from a Polish governess into humanity's guide to the atomic age. Scientists leave radiation detection badges, symbolic of the safety protocols her sacrifice made necessary. The tomb itself required special lead lining due to residual radioactivity. Even in death, Marie glows faintly with the forces she revealed. Her legacy burns brightest not in monuments or museums, but in the continuing work of discovery. in every researcher who refuses to accept that any mystery is too deep to solve. The atomic age she initiated has brought both wonders and terrors, medical miracles and existential threats, yet the essential truth she demonstrated remains. Patient observation and careful measurement can unlock nature's deepest secrets. In laboratories worldwide, scientists follow protocols she pioneered, ask questions her work made possible, push boundaries she first crossed. The glow of her radium samples has faded, but the light of knowledge she kindled burns eternal, illuminating pathways toward truth still waiting to be discovered. Marie's legacy extends far beyond the glowing tubes and careful measurements, reaching into every corner of modern life where radiation serves humanity. When doctors today position a cancer patient for targeted radiation therapy, they follow protocols born from her early observations about how different tissues respond to radioactive exposure. The precision beams that destroy tumors while sparing healthy organs represent the evolution of principles she discovered while noting how radium affected living cells. Every life saved, every cancer conquered, every child who grows up with parents who survived what was once unsurvivable, these victories trace back to a woman stirring cauldrons of pitchblende in a freezing shed, driven by curiosity about nature's hidden forces. The atomic age she unveiled brought complexities she could never have imagined, yet her approach to discovery remains our guide through its challenges. Nuclear power plants that light entire cities operate on principles she uncovered, their controlled reactions descendants of the spontaneous radioactivity she first measured. When engineers design safety systems with multiple redundancies, when technicians follow strict contamination protocols, when governments establish international standards for radiation exposure, they build upon foundations laid by her sacrifice. She showed us both the promise and the peril, teaching through her own suffering that forces powerful enough to transform civilization demand our deepest respect and most careful handling. Perhaps most enduringly, Marie's life reminds us that the greatest discoveries often come from those society least expects to make them. A Polish governess teaching French to disinterested children, a woman barred from universities in her homeland, a widow raising daughters alone while revolutionizing physics. Her journey proves that brilliance recognizes no boundaries of birth or circumstance. In laboratories worldwide tonight, young women bend over microscopes and particle detectors, following paths she carved through sheer determination. They work knowing that someone like them, someone told they didn't belong, someone who had to fight for every opportunity, once held up a glowing tube and changed our understanding of reality itself. As you settle into sleep, let Marie's patient dedication remind you that the universe reveals its secrets not to the swift or the privileged, but to those who observe with care and persist through difficulty. Her radium samples have long since decayed, their glow faded to darkness. But the light of knowledge she kindled burns eternal in every question asked, every mystery pursued, every barrier broken by those who dare to discover. Tomorrow brings new challenges and new possibilities, but tonight, rest peacefully knowing that one person's curiosity and courage can quite literally illuminate the world. May your dreams glow softly with the wonder of discovery, and may you wake refreshed, ready to pursue your own patient observations of the miracles that surround us all.